I've been a carp angler for over 25 years, and you could say it's a life's work. It's a lifestyle, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But when I was younger, looking back at these, I used to enjoy hearing stories of other guys' greatest achievements, their greatest captures, and be inspired by that. And in the Big Carp Story, this is the opportunity for me to look back and tell you guys some of the stories that until now have remained untold, and just for me to reminisce about the good times. Okay, so in this episode of the Big Carp Story, I'm going to go back to 2017 and tell the tale of the biggest carp that I've ever caught. But I'm going to start by rewinding a little bit to how I came to fish at this lake that is in Holland. After fishing Orient in the back end, the autumn of 2015, I fished from the bank. I've told the Big Carp Story about that session, but in the wake of that 2015 autumn session, I spent a lot of money on boat fishing equipment so that I was able to fish further out in open water on Orient. So I bought a bivvy boat, I bought a trailer, I bought an expensive electric engine, masses of lithium batteries, and that was sort of over the winter of 2015 into the winter of the new year of 2016. In the May of 2016, I got married, and I'd sort of said to Natalie after we get married in the spring, we've been away on our honeymoon, that in the back end of 2016, I was going to go to Orient for several sessions and use the boat fishing equipment that I'd purchased that winter. And then suddenly in the summer of 2016, my mum died. And for someone, my dad died when I was really, really young, and I was pretty close to my mum. And it came as a really big blow, and at the time I wasn't sure if I was going to be in the sort of frame of mind to go to Orient that autumn. I had a lot of things to deal with, obviously divvying up my mum's assets with my brother, and it was just a bit of a mad time really. My head wasn't right, but by the time September came round, I thought I needed it. I thought I'm going to go to Orient. I fished a 3-week session with my friend Dave Sloan, and Paul Forward dropped in for a part of that session. And this is where the story sort of begins of how I came to hear of the Dutch Black Mirror. So picture the scene, I'm at Orient, I'm on a bivvy boat in open water, not anchored. They've got 3 bivvy boats all sort of tied together as a convoy, and with my friend Constant and my friend Dave, and we're moving through the open water with all these, it's pretty hardcore. It's almost like a scene out of some sort of army film when you're moving across that much water. It's like you're at sea with all that sort of kit. When suddenly, as we're heading towards this point that we've anticipated that we're going to fish, suddenly from under the cover of the trees, we just see it it's a long distance. You see this boat coming out, and it's like as we're moving, we can see that this boat is moving towards us, and the closer it gets, we can see that it's obviously another carp angler. Quite quickly, I sort of realised that he's coming out to defend his area. He was fishing in this part of the lake. He'd seen us coming with 3 big bivvy boats, and he's thinking there's not room for himself and 3 anglers to be coming into this part of the lake. Anyway, he roars up to us on this boat, and I'm 6'3". This geezer's absolutely massive, big shaven bald head, at least as tall as me, probably 5 stone heavier than me, like a big old unit of a guy, a Dutch guy. And he gets into an argument with my friend Constant, and Constant is a local, lives near Orient, and they got into they're speaking in English, so it's like a Dutch guy and a French guy arguing English in the middle of the lake, you know, the banks, like we're in open water somewhere, and me and my friend Dave are like looking at each other across these bivvy boats thinking, what is going on there? There's constant like shouting, him shouting, and the long and short of it was, this guy called Marco, he was there first. Ultimately, you know, he was there first. We were coming. He was probably correct. There wasn't enough room for 3 new anglers to be setting up in that part of the lake. But he was quite aggressive in the way that he expressed that. And I think Constant took a little bit of exception to it. And in the end, you know, after they'd been arguing a while, I said, look, we'll just go somewhere else. I don't go fishing to argue with people. It's just drama that you don't need. Anyway, we sloped off and fished somewhere else. But in the days that followed, Constant went home and I'm still fishing with my friend Dave. This guy, Marco, suddenly starts sliding into my direct messages. You know, being, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be so aggressive, blah, blah, blah. But it was all, you know, it was all a veil for, he wanted to know what we were up to. He was at one end of the lake, we were fishing at the other end of the lake. It's a massively vast lake, like 6,000 acres we're in, and information, you know, from people that know what they're talking about is at a premium. And he was, yeah, very much sniffing around what Dave and I was up to without actually telling us anything about what he was doing. I knew that he'd caught some fish because I'd heard Constant had been back to that end of the lake since we'd split up. But he never mentioned that he'd been catching himself, but he was very much sniffing around what we were doing. After this 3-week session, I went home for 1 week. I came back to the lake and I set up in a position for a few days. I think I caught 1 fish. And then I moved after 4 or 5 nights and I got on the fish. You know what I mean? Like I got in fish on the first night that I was in this second spot on the second trip. I caught 8 fish in the night. And I got talking to Marco about these fish that I'd caught. And we ended up fishing alongside each other in this part of the lake. And during this time, he said to me, I had to go. I'd come out for a week. By the time I'd had 2 good nights on this spot, I had to go home for a week. Me and Natalie were trying for a baby at the time, and I had to be home on certain days of the month. So he said to me, when you go, I'll take your position, and then when you come back, you can have it. So it's one of those sort of, it sounded too good to be true, and it was. Basically, I went home. Came back a week later, because Marco had been catching really well, rather than go home like he said he was, he said, I'm going to stay, you'll just have to fish next to me, which, yeah, it irked me a little bit, you know. It's like, when people say they're going to do something, and they should do it, you know. That's sort of how I feel about it. If you say you're going to do something, you should do it. Even though I was irked, I fished a few hundred metres away from Marco, and we both caught some fish. Marco more so than me, but I think I had 2 50s. I had a 55 and a 54. I remember one particular night Marco had 4 fish over 20 kilos, which 4 over 44. And we were sort of taking it into, I was doing self-takes, but he didn't have the equipment to do self-takes, so I was going to his boat to take his pictures for him. And it was whilst I was on his boat, taking pictures of fish for him. So I've got his camera, I'm clicking away, taking pictures. And I'm reviewing the pictures, you know, after he's putting a fish back to get the next one out, I'm reviewing the pictures I've taken on the D-pad of his camera. And I've accidentally scrolled too far. And suddenly this fish has just popped onto the screen of his camera. And I'm like, that's a fish. That's a really special one, that is. And after I've taken the pictures of him, I mentioned that I've scrolled too far on his camera, and I'm like, what's this? And I think he said it was a 31 kilo mirror from Holland, which, you know, at the time there wasn't loads and loads of 30 kilo fish in Holland. But it wasn't just the fact that it was 30 kilos, it was really blue in colour, and a really nice carp, like quite long, really nice carp, like what you would call a scroll stopper, you know, something that, like, even on the back, on a tiny little screen on the back of his digital camera. Instantly I was like, cool. Over the course of the winter that followed, I kept in contact with Marco, and as it happened, Natalie conceived in February of 2017. And as soon as we knew that Natalie would be due to have a baby in October, all my plans to fish Orient in the autumn, because all of my previous experience at Orient had been in the autumn, I knew that the autumn of 2017 was going to be, I wasn't going to be able to be abroad, I was going to need to be at home in the UK. And you know, it's like, you know, well, for me in the winter, a lot of the time it's a time to reflect on what you've done and what you want to do next. The nights when you're not fishing, you know, you're hatching plans for what you want to do. And I kept in contact with Marco, and you know, we're exchanging messages on Facebook and whatnot here and there, talking about lakes and stuff. And slowly, over the course of the winter, Marco told me a little bit more about this Dutch 30 kilo mirror. He said it lives in a very small lake. I think sort of, I'm going to say it's sort of somewhere between 10 and 15 acres. It's not, it might, yeah, I would say 10 acres, 10, 12 acres. It's hard to know, but it's quite a small lake. He also said that there's only 10 to 15 carp in the lake. At least, say there's 15, 10 of those were very small fish that had been recently introduced, and the original stock amounted to about 5 or so, you know, 5 or 6 carp, real low stock. But most importantly, what he said is that that particular fish that he'd caught, the one that it was known as the black one, pretty much at the time under the radar. I'd never seen it on social media at that point. You know, certainly it was. Some of the people that lived in the area knew about it, but it certainly wasn't known about to the wider carp scene. And a fish of that quality, you know, was always going to cause, you know, a big stir when a well-known angler caught it and publicised it. Now, what really put the sort of plans into motion was when he said to me that carp had once done 4 captures in May. You know, with that one piece of information that it had done 4 captures in May, that it lives in a lake with 10 to 15 carp, it's obviously a very friendly one. You know, you get some carp are greedy, some carp are quite shy, and that was the second that he told me that it had done 4 captures one May, I knew that it was a greedy one. And if you've got a greedy carp that lives in a low stock lake, then you really do not need many bites to catch that fish. Obviously a lake with only 10 to 15 carp is going to be very difficult, but I would rather it be very low stock and difficult when the odds are stacked of each bite being that big one. And Marco had gone as far to say that 50% of the takes that occurred on this lake resulted in the capture of that fish. 50% of all bites resulted in the capture of that fish. And the more that I thought about that I couldn't fish in the autumn, you know, I couldn't go because Natalie was going to be having our twins that year. And the more that I thought that carp had done 4 captures in the spring one year, and the more that I thought that there's only 10 or 15 carp in here, I thought, I can catch that carp. You know, if I, you know, it's for a travelling angler, like a UK angler, to go to Europe in an attempt to catch an individual carp, you know, you've got to go with a little bit of time at your disposal. So plans were hatched to go there. I did get, basically at the last minute, I planned to fish there in May, and at the last minute I got sort of sidetracked. Someone came forward, basically saying that there was a lake on the Abbey Lakes complex at France that was sort of used as a shooting lake by the lake's owner, and that it was unfished. There was uncaught monsters in there, 50 or 60 pound fully scaled, or whatever it was. And I went there first of all. Like, my whole winter had been, I'm going to this lake with a black mirror in it in Holland, when at the last minute this opportunity, or so-called opportunity, arose to fish this shooting lake at Abbey Lakes. And basically what transpired is I'd been sort of, how to put it, lured into coming to this Abbey Lake. Basically they wanted me to fish them out so they could distribute the fish amongst the other lakes. So the owner wanted some well-known anglers to come to this shooting lake, catch the fish so they could be distributed amongst the lakes that do have fishing on. And that quick, within a few days of being there, watching the owner come and take the carp that we caught and put them into the other lakes, it just, first of all, I didn't think that big fish existed, or there certainly wasn't loads of big fish in this lake from what I saw in the boat. And then when I realised that I'd basically been lured out there to help get the fish out of this lake to put into the other lakes, it all sort of instantly was it all felt a bit ugly. And I headed to the lake in Holland, but because of I'd driven to France, fished this lake, I actually stopped over at my friend Ian's house in Holland. I dropped off my bivvy boat with him, a few other bits and pieces, before heading off to the Black Mirror Lake the following day. It's mad when you're going to a lake that you've never seen before. In my mind, I was just picturing, if there's this really big, amazing looking carp that's quite friendly, who's been known to get caught 1 May 4 times, in my head I pictured a small lake with bivvies all around it. I came off the motorway and I pulled up in a corner of the lake, and I had a load of, I've been drinking these like Monster Energy drinks, and I remembered as I pulled up, it's quite a regular thing for me when I'm going to the lake and I've had a coffee or whatever it is. I always need a poo when I get to the lake, so I arrived in the corner of the lake, rushed off into the woods to do my business, and sort of compose myself. And I'm picturing this little lake with bivvies everywhere. I'm going to walk round. I know most people in Holland speak English, so I'm going to have to sort of jostle for position with the other anglers. Anyway, as I've come through the woods from where I've parked, I've come to the corner of it. It's a fairly round or roundish, squarish lake. I sort of can see it's like early May. There's not a lot of foliage on the trees, and I can see the water sort of shimmering as I've walked up the path towards the lake. And the first thing I've seen as I've reached the water's edge is a big open swim on the far bank, empty. So no bivvy in it, no nothing. And one of the things that Marco had said to me before I'd been here was that if I ever decided to fish the lake, then I should fish the big open swim, because you can park behind it. It would put a lot of other, the fact that you'd be in that swim fishing it with your car would put other anglers off it, because as is typically the way in Holland, a lot of people use the boats to position their rods, and they fan them out over the whole lake. So if someone's in this big open swim, it would sort of put people off who might be thinking about fishing. So these thoughts are going through my mind as I'm walking along the far bank, and the whole time I'm thinking, any second, as I'm walking round, it's like, say 10, 12 acre roundish, squarish lake, that I'm going to see a bivvy. And after a minute or so, I've walked quite a way. I've been able to cast my eyes over most of the bank, and I've not seen a single car or a single bivvy or a single person. And quite quickly it dawns on me that, bear in mind it's the beginning of May, that nobody's there. So you've got for a UK angler to see, to know that there's a carp like that carp in that lake, and nobody's there, you just can't believe your luck. So there's, in carp fishing there's a massive amount, timing has a massive influence on things. If you're one of the first to get to somewhere before the crowds descend, then it will always be a much better experience. And having seen those pictures of Marco's camera and sort of coaxed out of him where this fish lived, And arriving there at the beginning of May 2017, I was way ahead of the masses, you know, way ahead. And when that realisation of no one being there, I literally jogged back to the car, or van, drove my van round to the big open swim that Marco had said that I should start from. And it's got like, basically the gap to the swim is almost the car's width. So if you park in really tight to this, to the gap that forms the swim, you can literally block access off to the public. It's a public lake or a club lake that's just, you know, it's got no fence around it. You can just walk around it, whatever. So I've pulled up. It's early afternoon, quite a grey, overcast day, around this squarish 12-acre lake with sort of tall trees all the way around it. So it's not very, the wind doesn't really hit. It's quite sheltered. And it was pitter-pattering with rain. And I remember I was chuckling to myself. I was thinking, gets caught 4 times in May, there's no one here. This is going to be like taking candy from a baby. And I had a little 1.8 metre inflatable, which my first port of call, I thought, well, I'm thinking any second someone might turn up, you know, and want to fish. And then you're going to feel a little bit hesitant to jump in the boat and, you know, sort of go and explore the lake. So I thought, no one's here, it's the beginning of the session. Pump up your boat, get out on the water and have a real quick look round. And the lake's really deep. I don't want to put an exact depth on it, but it's definitely like 30 or 40 feet in places, this lake. Marco said there were some sort of open water plateaus, like not plateaus that are close to the surface, deep water plateaus. So let's say it's 10 or 15 metres. They might come up a few metres off the bottom, but they're certainly not in the depth of water that I anticipated before I'd arrived to the lake that I'd be fishing in, because it was really deep. These plateaus were really deep. The water always warms from the surface in the spring. Before I arrived, I anticipated that all of my fishing would be done around the margins of the lake, because it'd be warming up in the edge quickest. The fish will be high in the upper layers of the water. And what I wanted to do on this opening day was to get round in the boat and look at all of the margins, you know, look for gravel spots that might have been touched, you know, like dusted off, areas that, you know, just screamed carp, you know, reedy areas, snaggy areas, whatever it may be. I wanted to explore the lake. And I'd been told prior to arrival that the water was crystal clear and that you could see down like 10 or 15 feet easily to the bottom. But on arrival, that wasn't the case. You know, there was, it was overcast and dull for a start, but there was also this sort of suspended algae in the water. And I would say that visibility was to no more than 3 or 4 feet. And after getting out in the boat and looking, there was no massive areas of fallen trees, like visible snags that would hold carp. The lake was reed lined, quite heavily reed lined, but it seemed to drop off quite quickly. And I certainly, on the first, like I'd done a couple of laps in the boat, on those first couple of laps that day, while it was overcast, nothing really jumped out and grabbed me. You know, I didn't see a spot and think, God, mate, I'm going to catch them off that, or they'd definitely be here. It was too deep, it was too murky, too much algae in the water, too overcast. And I put a few handfuls of sweet corn and tigers on a few gravel spots right in the edge against the reed, you know, where I could see the bottom in 3 or 4 foot of water. I'd just done a couple of laps, but without overly overthinking it or marking it, just a couple of handfuls of corn, a couple of handfuls of tigers on any bits of exposed gravel close to the bank. After travelling, you know, after leaving Iron's house and coming to the lake, I'd gone from Iron's house, I had to go to the local pet shop to get my ticket. That's what I had to do. So I had to get my ticket. I had to drive from Irons to a pet shop near the lake, buy my permit for the lake, and then I'd done my laps looking for spots. And because it was really low stock, you know, the chances of just casting out willy-nilly and thinking you're going to catch one on night one, in my opinion, slim to none, like slim to zero. If you had a bit of information or a sighting or something, then yeah, you can obviously catch one on the first night. But for me, having seen nothing, I thought the best course of action was to just plot up camp, leave all my rods in my rod bag. I had some sort of, I think I was fishing stiff hinge rigs or something like that. I planned to fish pop-ups. Got my hooks all sharpened and stuff. And the plan was to just have a few beers, watch the lake, sleep, and in the morning at first light, do the heron thing, you know, get out at the water's edge, and if anything jumped, I was going to cast it. Rather than just, I didn't want to be trapped, because quite often you put rods out willy-nilly for just the sake of it, when the fish do start showing, by just the time that it takes to have to retrieve them and re-rig, sort of is holding you back. I wanted to be very loose in the morning. I wanted to be like free to react. And that first morning, it was cold. It was like I say, early May, a bit of a northeasterly blowing. I'm in this big open swim. And as the light turned down to my right, I was in the middle of a sort of quite a long bank, down to my right as it sort of curled round on a corner. These, I remember these 3 mallards are sort of cutting across the corner, and a fish just like come up like a periscope, stuck its head out, sort of mid-flank, small fish, you know, not big fish, like I would have said a 20, maybe a 20. And in the time it took me to get the rod together, think about casting, another one that showed in the same area. And it was about, I don't know, I'm going to say about 80 yards. The 2 fish had showed about 80 yards from where I was stood. And I had a tiny 1.5 ounce bomb with pop-up rig all rigged up. And like, quite, you know, fishing 80 yards with 1.5 ounce bomb, whipped it out there. Got a good enough drop to think that I was fishing. And rather than sort of bomb more rods in the area, I sat behind that single rod thinking that there's only 10 or 15 carp in this lake. That pop-up is sat out there, and it's quite likely that that black mirror was in that corner with those fish. You know, that's how I felt. You know, I felt like this is morning 1 and I've got a pop-up sat presented under probably the population of the lake. So that morning after the first night had just sort of slid away. Once you get to lunchtime, you know, I felt like that opportunity was over. But what I didn't want to do is go and take the boat in that area of the lake. Now I knew that fish, say the lake's the shape of this desk, I'd seen them in the right-hand corner down here. I wanted to go and explore in the boat, but I didn't want to ruin where I'd seen the activity. So I looked around the rest of the lake in the boat early afternoon, didn't see anything. So by process of elimination, you know, I've seen them here, not seen them there. I think they're in this right-hand corner. I made a few sort of exploratory casts with a light lead in the vicinity, just to have a little feel around if there was anything that felt nice out there. There's a bit of a bar, there was sort of a protruding reed bed, sort of down to my right, and off of this reed bed was definitely some shallower ground that came out sort of 20, 30 metres into the lake. And these 2 fish that had shown had sort of been off the end of this shallower point. It was basically like a bar, like a sandy sort of bar that come off these reeds for 20, 30 metres. So where these 2 fish had shown, there was basically like a point of reeds down to my right-hand side, down my right-hand margin. And off of this point of reeds came like, it was like a bar, like a sandy sort of bar, much shallower than the surrounding water. And it sort of stretched out into the lake for sort of 20, 30 metres and then stopped abruptly. You know, it suddenly wasn't shallow out there anymore. It was like obviously like the end of something. And it was these 2 fish had been right off the end of where this shallow bit had stopped out in the lake. And it felt quite hard out there. It felt pretty interesting, you know, like having seen the activity, found a feature, going into the first night with rods in the water. Now I fished 2 pop-ups out off the end of this shallow zone, sprayed a few, I think they were 18mm active 8s in the throwing stick. Really sort of a minimal, not too intrusive sort of get out really. I had not bombed it to death. I'd done so with a light lead. I'd not spommed, I'd got out with the throwing stick. It was all quite stealthy, you know, and I was going into that first night, I felt moderately confident, but at the same time, although it was early May, there's been a northeasterly blowing, and it felt more like March than it did May. It was freezing, you know, real cold. It certainly weren't walking around in a t-shirt, spotting weather. It was real cold, sort of like 10 degrees, 10, 11, 12 degrees in the daytime. So not what I'd had in my mind before I left home. You know, I was thinking I'm going to be looking for him in the sun, not hunkering down. But after that night passed, I never saw any fish. For the next, I would say 2 or 3 nights slipped by in quite wintry conditions. During the day, in between the rain showers and that were going on, I would take to the boat. I would look at the marginal spots where I'd baited to see if any of the bait had gone, and just generally looking for fish, you know, just exploring. But conditions just, they weren't right. And after, I think it was after 3 nights of fishing, on say the 4th morning, about 11, 12 o'clock, the sun came out a little bit, just a noticeable difference, you know, like you instantly feel it when it's been cold. It's just had that sort of warming effect, and I thought, yeah, now's a good time to go and have a quick look. And as I've turned left, I've gone left out of my swim, away from the corner where I'd previously seen the activity. I'm heading towards the first marginal spot that I'd baited. And this spot that I'd baited, it had, if you imagine like the end of a branch in the winter that snapped off, just a real twiggy branch, it's no thicker than my finger, probably about this sort of long, a few little spindly bits of it, had fallen and sunken onto the bottom. And next to this twig on the bottom was sort of a few stones. I could see the bottom was slightly exposed there, and I'd baited that spot with, like I say, a couple of handfuls of corn, a couple of handfuls of tigers. And as I'm approaching this spot, it's sort of probably 60 metres down my margin, my left-hand margin. As I'm heading towards that to look at it, I just, because of the algae in the water, it was always going to be like this. I basically found myself on top of my first carp that I'd seen from the boat. It was a common 25, 30 pounds, something like that. I was directly above it when I saw it. It was already heading away from me, but towards the spot that I'd already baited. And I just basically saw it go off its tail was going mad. It was like in a blur and disturbed debris and stuff. And it shot off in the direction of my spot. Anyway, when I got to the spot, all the bait was gone. All the bait was gone off the spot. Well, I say all the bait, there's only a couple of handfuls on it in the first place. But on top of all the bait being missing, it was visibly, as before I could see a few stones, it was now dusted off. You know, it started to have that sort of creamy glow which a freshly worked spot gets, you know. And in that exact moment, you know, this is, you know, I've had the chance to have cast to some jumping fish. This is my next opportunity. I've had a few days hunkering down and cut on a cold northeasterly, biding my time. And as soon as the sun came out, suddenly it was like instantly, suddenly it felt like there was a little chance. So gone back to the swim, got a rod, got a rig, baited it with a couple of tiger nuts, gone out in my little 1.8 metre inflatable. I can see the gravel spot perfectly, so I sprinkle like 15, 20 tigers on the gravel spot first, let them all come to rest, and then slowly just lower the rig down onto the near edge of the spot. So I've got no line running through it, got this little stick on the bottom with a few, like a branch as thick as my finger, a few little twiggly bits, and the clear spot's just to the right of it, laid the rig down, gone back to the bank, everything's perfect. And it, sort of, as I'd been flapping around that morning, getting myself sort of settled, I'd had the van completely blocking the entrance to my swim. It was literally, it had been impossible to get access. If a member of the public or another angler wanted to get into my swim, there'd be no way of doing it. The car was so well parked into the brambles, literally they'd had to have climbed over my bonnet to get into the swim. But I'd moved it. I'd needed to get to the back doors for something, and I've not been quite so meticulous. I put it in tight, but not as well as I put it on the first day. And the reason that I'd been so sort of purposeful about blocking entrance to the swim is, if you're a well-known angler like myself, you know, I'd only need to be seen by one angler, and straight away, you know, the text messages are going round. Oh, Darrell Peck from Corder's here. He's like fishing our local lake. And I thought the longer that no one knew I was there, the better. You know, I was sort of under the radar. So I've just got this rod in position. My van's blocking the entrance to the path, but not quite as well as it had been. When suddenly, this guy is literally in the brambles, bent over my bonnet, like trying to squeeze himself into the swim, like scratching himself up. And he's had to come through at such a force that as he's come into the swim, he's tripped over the brambles and fell in a heap at my feet onto the back of my bivvy, like literally smacked into my bivvy. And he's laying there on his back like this with his hands up, saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what the f are you doing, mate? Like, it's pretty obvious that I wasn't inviting anyone in, and you just, he's like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I saw the English plates and I just wanted to come and say hi. In that situation, what are you going to do?